Now to the Roundtable, Peggy Noonan from the Wall Street Journal, David Plouffe, former senior advisor to President Obama, now at Bloomberg Television, Dan Senor, former Bush administration official, co-founder of the Foreign Policy Initiative, and Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize-winning economist from the New York Times in Princeton. Welcome to all of you. And Peggy, let me begin with you. Senator Graham did not sugarcoat at all, said they're ruining both institutions, yet there doesn't seem to be a way out.
Yeah, it is fascinating that nobody seems to know where this thing goes and how it ends. I mean, it is a crisis. Normally, people have a sense of it. I think Lindsey Graham was very correct when he said we will all be better off and the Republicans will be better off when this particular shutdown ends. I think, look, people don't like these things. They like it when government works. Both parties suffer when stuff like this happens. But the essential point that nobody knows where this goes is the great mystery of this battle.
And we're getting so close, Paul Krugman. And Republicans do seem to be trying to negotiate, led by Mitch McConnell, terms of surrender. But Democrats not willing to give, at least at this point, even much of a fig leaf.
Yeah. So, first of all, I think it's actually kind of important that we don't know that it's exactly October 17th.
Right.
So, you know, if we wake up Thursday morning and they haven't defaulted yet, don't say, oh, that was all a false alarm.
But the consequences could also hit before October 17th.
Yeah, probably not, I think. But it probably runs, it may well run a few more days. So, but the point is, this is very close. We're very close to the edge. The Democrats, the thing that you get always from them is their basic principle is we do not give anything under threat of extortion. Nothing, and of course the Republicans want a fig leaf, and that fig leaf has to involve we got something for our extortion. And that much more than the details of the budget is the stumbling block. It is that whatever happens, the Democrats say, you lift the extortion threat, then we negotiate. But as long as the debt ceiling is still in play, as long as the government shutdown is still a condition for other stuff, it's not a deal.
And Dan Senor, we heard a lot of talk about Paul Ryan. You've been a close advisor to Paul Ryan, the congressman, former vice presidential candidate. And his experience this week, I think, points up the dilemma that everyone's facing. He comes forward with a plan that's really unacceptable to Democrats, completely unacceptable to Democrats, yet he gets hammered by his own side.
He gets hammered in the blogosphere, a little bit on talk radio. But actually, House conservatives in the House Republican Conference have been behind him, because what he's essentially saying is he's calling the president's bluff. He says, look, we need to get through this period, Mr. President. We need to extend the debt ceiling and get through this period. Let's agree on reforms that you have been for. Medigap reform, means testing Medicare beneficiaries, increasing contributions of federal employees. These are all proposals that were in the president's fiscal year 2014 budget. You say you want these things. You say you want to do real reforms. They can save hundreds of billions of dollars. It's not as massive a savings as Paul would have preferred in the reform package he's introduced in the past, but he's telling House Republicans, let's call the president's bluff and try to get something done.
David Plouffe, of course, you worked closely with President Obama for many years. He seems convinced at this point that actually the consequences of negotiating are even more severe than the consequences of actual default. Does he really mean that?
Well, obviously, he takes the threat of default enormously seriously. But I think after we went through in 2011, we got this close to default then. He doesn't want to do this again. No president should have to do this again. We've got to break this pattern. I do think ultimately there's probably a deal here, but we've got to take the threat of default off the table, reopen the government. Can we do some things on long-term entitlement reform, some things to help the economy in the short-term, tax reform? I think we can. The question is right now, I do think there's a possibility of something coming out of the Senate that would get 70, 75 votes. But if Boehner insists on doing this with most of his caucus, I'm not sure the Tea Party is capable of reopening government or not defaulting right now. So I'm deeply concerned about this. I think the notion that somehow this is going to be easily solved this week is completely false.
My sense is, I've been writing this. It's just what I think. Republicans made a mistake. They picked a fight. They had no strategy. They had no end game. They had no plan. That's what it is. It was a mistake. That having been said, I think the president has made counter mistakes, not only in the famous stories of the things that were forcibly shut down and the shutdown and all that stuff, but the sense he has communicated that, hey, I'm not having a conversation. We're not having negotiations. Presidents have to negotiate on debt limits. They have to own it. We have all seen, we've worked in White Houses, we've seen presidents do this. You can call what the other side does to you extortion. What it really is an argument and a deal, and at the end you trade some horses and do your best.
No, that never happened. Nothing like this has ever happened before. All of the alleged former examples, you actually look at them, they turn out to be either there was a budget deal that included a debt ceiling raise, but the debt ceiling was not a hostage, or once. Tip O'Neill held up the debt ceiling for one day, more as symbolism. There was never before a case where one party pushed the U.S. government to the edge of default, demanding concessions in return. So every attempt to make this sound like business as usual, it's not. This is something completely out of the previous experience.
It is more heightened, but it is still part of business as usual because it takes place within a context of an American president having to deal with the reality around him and the opposite party having to deal with the fact that he has the presidency, he has the executive. Make a deal.
And there is a political reality here as well. Pretty striking poll come out in your paper this week, the Wall Street Journal, NBC Wall Street Journal poll. I want to go through some of the numbers right here. Shows the Republican Party taking the brunt of the blame for the shutdown. 53% blame the Republicans. The view of the Republican Party, 24% positive right now. According to the pollsters of the Wall Street Journal, the lowest they've ever recorded, 24% positive. Only 14% of the country thinks we're going in the right direction right now. And as Lindsey Graham cited earlier, 60% of the country would replace every single member of Congress. So, Dan Senor, as Lindsey Graham said, everyone's falling, but Republicans taking a far greater hit. Don't they have to figure out a way to end this dynamic?
Absolutely. There's no doubt that this is damaging to the Republican brand. That said, a year from now, this will have been long resolved. And I don't think voters will be talking about this shutdown and the dysfunction. What people will be talking about is the failed implementation of Obamacare. There are very few House seats that are really in play. There's like a tiny percentage of Republican House members that are in districts that President Obama won. There are 6 Senate seats, Democratic Senate seats, that need to be defended that Mitt Romney won by more than 10%. So the field, both in the House and the Senate, is much more favorable to Republicans. I think this is a bad moment for Republicans. I think it'll pass. I think the field, the history of the party out of the White House winning midterms, combined with the failed implementation of Obamacare,
I want to say something about
going to be advantageous.
The Obamacare thing will also be long past. They messed up the software for the federal version of it. But we have the exchanges working just fine in many states, which means it's fixable and it will be fixed. California has a perfectly well-functioning exchange, which it's running itself. If you can do it for 30 million people, you can do it for 300 million. So Obamacare will be working fine.
Let me pick up another thread of what you just pointed out, because when I look at these deals being negotiated right now, a 4-month extension of the government funding resolution, a 6-month extension of the debt limit, David Plouffe, I look at that and say, this is not going to be over a year from now. If you extend the debt limit 6 months predicated on long-term budget negotiations, aren't we going to be back in exactly the same place 6 months from now?
The nightmare just keeps recurring. And let's look what the House proposal was. Essentially, it was changes in Medicare to extend the debt ceiling for 6 weeks so we can completely destroy the economy around the holiday season. It makes no sense. And we got to remember, we're already at Republican budget levels. We are already operating at Republican budget levels, and this was not a budget discussion, Peggy. This was, they wanted to inject health care into the debate. We've never seen that before. But I think these numbers are damaging in the long term for the Republican. I think you have to understand, they're already facing near fatal demographic problems right now. And you add this into the mix here, you've got suburban women, a lot of middle-class voters outside of the South are really souring on the Republican Party. And so I think for their politics, this has to get over. But listen, America needs a functioning, a principled, yes, but a functioning Republican Party again. And I think you're seeing in the Senate with the Republican governors that sense of frustration really growing. And hopefully those more common sense people who want to govern, not destroy the government, will have their voices raised.
Yeah, the governors are key, I got to tell you. Everywhere you go among Republicans, they start talking about what's happening in Washington, the Senate, the House, and then they go, our governors are great. And indeed, there's much excitement there, and I think the future of the party, 2016, is there. Paul, I got to tell you, I disagree with your point on Obamacare, of course. I think for the next year, as Dan said, it's going to be a big suppurating wound. There's too much connected to it that is going to be a constant grinding tension. One is this congressional thing where Congress passes things, but they get special benefits. The American people don't get them. You think well,
it's really not true. But the main point is that software. I mean, a software glitch.
Oh, but it's more than
embarrassing.
software.
More than
they've had to
software.
stitch together web platforms for the Department of Justice, Health and Human Services, Social Security Administration, Homeland Security, in order to make this enrollment work. It's a technology disaster. The architect of the website said in March that we'll be lucky if this thing doesn't look like a third world experience.
Right. So they messed up. But the thing is, again,
it's not just a small thing to mess it up. It's a kind of big thing to mess up.
A state with more than 30 million people, a state with 10% of the whole U.S. population, has a perfectly functioning exchange. That says this is doable. That says that they will fix it. I just can't imagine.
Just to David's point on the Republican brand, the changing demographics. Again, I think the House will stay in Republican hands. I think it's a toss-up in terms of where the Senate winds up in 2014. If you look at 2016, you look at the kinds of people thinking about running. Chris Christie is going to have a double-digit win in his re-election in New Jersey next month. I think you would agree with that. Susana Martinez, 60% approval rating, governor of New Mexico. John Kasich, 50% approval rating in Ohio. Scott Walker, near 50. I mean, the idea that Republicans who are actually working on things are somehow damaged by all this chaos in Washington, I think.
We're just about out of time. We got to take a minute left. I just want to quickly go around the table. Is there a deal before Thursday's deadline? Do the consequences of default start to kick in?
I think it's no better than 50-50. And so I think the country needs to prepare that this could go on for a while.
I think the House is nervous, the Senate is nervous, and the White House is nervous. Nobody knows how this ends or exactly when, but there will be great pressure to clean this up, especially if damning polls continue to come out.
I think it's no better than 50-50, and the positive 50 comes entirely from the likelihood that the markets are going to say something really very loud when they open tomorrow.
I think they will get through it. Republicans should get through this and move as quickly as possible to a debate on Obamacare to prove what Paul's prediction is actually not correct.
And we'll see if House Speaker John Boehner survives that kind of a vote. Thank you all very much. Great discussion.